Hello, and welcome to Continuing Education, a podcast for homeschooling families with actually useful information. I'm Heidi, and today we're going to talk about how to help your kids gain ownership of their own education. So I want to take you back many years ago. After I had spent a year or two homeschooling our oldest kiddo, I quickly realized that unless our kid valued his own education more deeply and had a large say in his own learning, that homeschooling for us would just not be successful. I didn't want to spend hours nagging or reminding or spoon feeding him information, nor was that the path that he wanted to take. It ended up in having a lot of conflict that really was unnecessary. And it took a while to kind of find our stride. After kind of having that realization, we quickly started trying to find ways to empower him to take ownership of his own education and the journey, because we wanted him to feel enthusiastic for learning and for him to understand how invaluable an education would be, that if he owned that process, he would be more motivated to complete the work directly. So today we're going to talk about some of the strategies and methods that we've used in order to involve our kids in the educational planning, to help them set goals for their education, and to allow them the freedom to pursue interests and passions just for the joy of it. There are a lot of benefits for using these strategies, one of which is that it fosters that intrinsic motivation where your kids are driven by that internal reward, that it's not something that's external, that's acting upon them or being dictated to, that they are more actively involved. Also, it promotes their own curiosity. When they feel like they're in charge, they feel empowered to be more curious about things and take part in things just for the sake of learning, not because they're being required to and they just want to get done with what you're assigning them. We have found that by engaging them a little bit more in their own educational goals, that then we can engage them more deeply with the subject itself, that they start to take a deeper interest in the subject. I'm not saying that it solves all of your woes and the subjects that they don't like, but when they feel like they're dictating what's happening, they feel more invested in the knowledge that they learn. We also think we have seen that their ability to understand and retain the information has improved. One of our kiddos is very driven by the by the need to know why this is helpful or where he's going to need to know this information. And so when he knows that, it helps him commit the information better because he knows this isn't just something I'm passing off to be done with right now. I might need this information 10 or 15 or 20 years from now, or I'm going to use this information in 2 years as I tackle a more in-depth subject that I might need to know in long term. Also, it helps them to be able to apply those real life skills and to also spend some time developing their own critical thinking and decision making, being able to prioritize their work based on what's important and problem solve based on what they want to do in life. Before we kind of get into the strategies, I do want to say a little caveat that sometimes we have found that when our kids feel in charge of their education, that can be really scary. So some kiddos, especially those with anxiety, will get really worried about making choices in case it's the wrong one. We have, some kids, you probably have seen it when they're going around and they're trick-or-treating on Halloween, for example. You might put out a bowl and say, take any candy you want. Well, some kids will quickly grab a candy and move on, while some kids will literally spend minutes analyzing the candy and going through all the different possibilities of which candy is the right one to choose. And that's because the fear of making the wrong choice is too great. So one thing that we have done as parents is we try to alleviate that burden a little bit by telling our kid that, you know what, as parents, we're going to make the final decision. And so if it's bad, it's on us, right? Like that they don't have to feel like that dread of feeling like, oh no, what if I make the wrong choice? But also that because they know themselves best, we want to empower their own advocacy. We want to use their unique insights as information to help us. That way, the failure is always on us, and kids don't have to feel the pressure of making that bad choice. As their parents, that's ultimately our responsibility to be in charge of their education. And so we don't want to place that on them. So let's move into some strategies. How do you nurture your kiddo to be more engaged in their learning? And can be really challenging if you have kids who just want to get the work done so they can go play, especially if they don't quite do the work to your satisfaction, or they're quickly trying to just check things off, or you have kids who you feel like are trying to weasel out of the work. It can be really hard. So let's go ahead and talk about that. The first thing is, and this is probably the number one thing that I offer to all homeschooling families that I talk to, is I recommend using a contract. So at the beginning of the year, sit down with your kid, whether you want to do this with all of your kids together or just that one-on-one, that's up to you and what you think is best. But at the beginning of the year, sit down with them and talk about what they're obligated to do as the child and what you're obligated to do as the parent. So what am I in charge of? What's my job? And what are they in charge of and what's their job? So for example, I, as the parent, am responsible for providing a curriculum, for teaching the material, for reteaching the material if they don't understand it, for providing a safe learning environment, for making sure they have pens and pencils and all the other things that they might need. They are responsible for reading the material, for completing the assignments to the best of their ability, for letting me know if they don't understand something, or for using all of their resources. So, for example, if they have a question about history, a specific war or a tank that was used in war, they're responsible for thinking, okay, is there a book I can get this information from? Can I go Google this on the internet? Really using all the resources that we have. So those are just some examples, things that I might be responsible for, things that they might be responsible for. Then take time to think about, okay, what if something happens and you fall short of what you've agreed to? So, for example, if you have a kiddo who gets really frustrated when they get questions wrong and they break pencils or tear papers, right? That can be a really challenging behavior to deal with because you're feeling like they're acting out. They don't care about the work. They don't care about the supplies that I've provided them. So write down in the contract what will happen when that occurs. So for example, if they break a pencil out of frustration because they're not getting the questions right, what will happen is maybe they owe you 25 cents for the pencil. Maybe they have to spend 5 minutes explaining to you what they don't understand, or you spend 5 minutes re-explaining the information to them. Come up with whatever you think makes sense. I apologize. My dog is doing a little yelping in the background if you hear a little noise. Or another example, so if they're tearing the papers, for example, if you have a kiddo who gets really frustrated and tears the paper into multiple pieces of paper, maybe what happens when that occurs, I hate to call it a consequence because I'm not big into those, but what happens when that occurs is they have to rewrite it on another piece of paper so that you can actually evaluate the work, that you're not going to go piece together this one piece of paper in order to understand or to make sure that they understand the material. Along with that, talk through what will happen if you don't carry out your end of the bargain, right? That's what a contract is. It's an agreement between two parties. So it can't just put all the burden on them, but what will happen if you don't do something? So as an example, if you have the kind of schedule where you've set like, okay, from 8 to 9, the kids are going to do this, but from 9 to 10, I'm going to review their work and I'm going to reteach anything that they don't understand. What happens if at 8:55 you get a call from your very bestie across the country who's in a crisis moment and you're on the phone for an extra 30 minutes? Well, that pushes back your obligation, which is to reteach any material they don't understand, and therefore you're not staying true to your end of the bargain. So what happens when that occurs? Do you just ask them to wait 30 minutes and they get some kind of reward, like an extra long, I don't know, recess or something if you have a really structured day? Or maybe it's something like, you know what, I didn't have time. That was something I agreed to. So instead, I'm going to take you out for ice cream. And while we're eating ice cream, I'm going to go ahead and review your work then and reteach you then. Maybe it's something as simple as that. But there should be consequences for them and for you if you're not keeping your end of the bargain. And once we've kind of decided that, and it can be a long conversation if you've got a kid who really wants to be heard, it can take time to talk it through and write it down. So then when you've got that done, write it all down, type it up, whatever is easiest for you, and you both sign it. And so that way you can tuck it away or put it on the wall. You can always reference it if you need to later because you need to refer them or yourself to the rules of how you guys agreed that you guys were going to go forward with homeschooling this year. This obviously will help them feel empowered and involved in their education. What's really helpful about using a contract is we have had lots of times, mid-semester or mid-year where something happens. And when we refer to the rules or we refer to our contract, we didn't outline it. And so it gives us another opportunity to revisit that and say, okay, we clearly need to add an amendment. And what do we want to add? And what happens if this isn't abided by on either end? And then we can write it in and we can initial it so that we both understand what's going to happen in this scenario that we didn't anticipate. That also teaches them that natural learning cycle, right? That you can plan for something and do your very best, but then there are inevitably going to be things that you missed or things that pop up. And so there's an opportunity for them to adjust. This gives them a good growth mindset that it's okay when things go wrong, that it can be adjusted. And then the next time we do it for the next year, we'll get a little bit better because we have a little bit more experience in this and we know a little bit more about what might happen. And so that can happen over time and allows kiddos to really fine tune that process in their minds, which is not necessarily something that they would get immediately, maybe not until they hit their career. So it's a good skill to learn in general, but also it keeps you guys both accountable throughout the school year. So there's never that argument of, well, you said this and, the other party going, I didn't say that. Well, now it's all written down. We've agreed to what's going to happen and we're both accountable to what we agreed to at the beginning of the year. The next strategy is to involve your kids in the planning. I was driving my oldest son back from an activity and I had told him that I wanted to have a podcast about this concept. And I had asked him, I said, we have really worked hard to make it so that you feel like you're in charge of your own education. Can you tell me what do you think that we've done that have helped you feel that way? And what have you liked the most? And this was the strategy he liked the most, which is that he feels like he is empowered to make decisions, that we ask him about how he likes to learn. We ask him about what his preference is for showing us what he learns. So we ask all kinds of questions about do you like to read? Do you like to watch videos? Would you rather listen to an audiobook? Do you like it when mom and dad teach? Do you like doing this 3 days a week? Or would you rather do a lot of work 2 or 3 days a week, or you want to do a little work every week? What kind of schedule do you prefer? Do you like a checklist? Do you like a more structured schedule? We involve our kids in the planning throughout the whole process. Now, there are things that we might have to overrule. We might have to say, well, you have to learn writing, so you don't have the option to opt out of that. But you have the power to determine, maybe you can write with a pencil or a pen, or maybe you're old enough that you can be typing it on a computer. You don't need to be writing it. So there are things that we can give based on, grade appropriate skills. We can give options for, but that's something that we do frequently is how are things going? How do you like this curriculum? And we do this every semester and obviously at the beginning of the semester, but before we choose the curriculum, we talk about it. Then in the middle of the year, as we approach, the Christmas time between semesters, we talk about it again. Sometimes we'll talk about it. Right now we're kind of in that spring slump time and our kids are having a hard time getting through their work. And so I've talked about it again with my youngest kiddo. I've said, hey, maybe you'd do better with a more structured schedule. What do you think if we did this? Do you think that would help you get through? Maybe you need a little motivation to get through. Can I give you some? So the point is that we're constantly talking about how we can involve them in making these choices. One thing that I learned, this was a couple years ago, I had chosen a curriculum that I thought it was a science curriculum. I thought it was the best science curriculum. It was laid out really well. It had videos that went along with the lessons in the book. I thought this was the best curriculum. And during my usual course at the end of the semester, I talked to my oldest son and I said, "Hey, how's the curriculum going?" And I expected to hear, "Hey, it's great. I love it." But that's not what I heard. I heard, "Well, the video is kind of hard to understand because when they're talking, the volume of the music that's behind the speaker is a little too loud. And so it makes it difficult to understand what they're saying." Also, I took that information. I said, "Okay, well, fine. Let's turn on the captions and you can read the material," because I was set on keeping the curriculum. I didn't want to get rid of something that I felt was so perfect. And so yes, he gave me feedback. I didn't quite hear him. And so I turned on the captions instead and kind of had to do that for a couple weeks. And then I asked again, "How is that going? Do you like that? Does that fix the need?" Because dang it, I didn't want to get rid of the curriculum. And he said, "Well, no, actually the captions are really distracting." And so what happened at the end of that semester was, luckily we were coming right on up on Christmas when it's a natural transition anyway. I got rid of that curriculum because if he's not learning, it's not doing anything. It's not filling the need that we have in our family, which is that he's learning material about the things that I want him to learn. So we had to toss that curriculum and we went on search for finding a new curriculum that actually fit his needs. That can be a really hard thing to do. And it can be hard to know, what things do I let my kid choose and what things do I choose for them? And to this, I just offer, when you can offer a choice, if it doesn't matter either way, offer a choice, because they may have strong preferences, but also they will feel like they can make choices. And it allows them to make choices in a safe way. So anytime that you can offer a choice, offer a choice. There are going to be things that you feel like you can't offer a choice. For example, can you opt out of math? No. But maybe you can choose whether you learn online, whether you learn with a video that you can rewind, that it's kind of asynchronous. Maybe you can learn from a book. Maybe you learn from a tutor, right? We can give them those kinds of options because those are the kinds of things that we can choose, but we can't choose whether or not you do it. So anytime that we have options for how they learn or where they learn, we like to make sure to offer them those options so they feel empowered to make the decision and to advocate for themselves when things go wrong. For when that science curriculum wasn't working for my son, I had come up with a solution to turn on the captions, but I had kind of already failed because he didn't then feel comfortable coming back to me and saying, "Mom, I did the captions for a day and it's not working." He just kind of continued along reading the captions, even though he wasn't retaining the information, and waited for me to ask him again how things were going. So we want to be able to ask for their opinions and act upon it so they feel empowered to know that when they advocate for themselves, that they're going to be listened to. So involve your kids in the planning. That's strategy number 2. Strategy number 3 is to consider your child's interests. So if you can give them skin in the game by using what they love, they will explode with so much energy and excitement because you're using their passions to help them learn. This is especially true, I think, if you can use subjects that they don't love and you can pair it with something that they do love. So, for example, if you have a kiddo who loves building things but isn't into math, maybe you can have them build a really complex bridge, and then they can use what they know to determine perimeter or to identify fractions based on the bridge design. Or maybe you have a kiddo who loves sports, knows all the different statistics about sports, and they are just really involved in sports and they know everything about it, but they really hate writing. Well, maybe what you could do is you could say, "Okay, I want you to write a script for Sportscaster about your favorite game. Like, pretend that they're narrating this game. And I want you to come up with metaphors that they might use, because sportscasters get really excited and involved in the way that they're describing what's happening on the screen, and be sure that you have to describe it because you might have audio only listeners." that kind of thing where you could kind of take what they love and transition it in a way, one, that it's useful in real life. A sportscaster really does need to do that. And maybe they're going to be a sportscaster. Maybe that's how they're going to pursue their passion. But also, two, it helps them learn the skill that ultimately you want them to learn. So you may need to seek out additional books or classes or projects or unit studies or clubs or maybe community events to kind of fit this need. You kind of need to be resourceful and really creative of how do I do this? This can be a real big challenge, especially if you're kind of an in-the-box thinker. So I will give you a little tip. I encourage you to use AI. I know this can be a really controversial subject, but if you were to go to ChatGPT, and which we will talk about more in another subject as incorporating AI into your homeschool, and you were to say, my kid is really interested in this, but they really struggle with this subject. Give me 5 ideas on how I can use their interests to teach them this thing that they don't like. ChatGPT may be just enough information to kind of get your brain running with ideas that you can use. It may not have the most perfect unit study. It may not come up with the most perfect project, but at least it gives you somewhere to start. If you're kind of a black and white thinker or someone who doesn't really feel like you have the creative juices to kind of come up with it on your own, there's no shame in using all of your resources, my friends. All right, strategy number 4. Give them opportunity for independence, even when they're young. And this is probably going to be really easy for your kids who already like independence. And it may be more difficult for your kids who really like for you to sit next to them, point to each question, and walk them through each thing. If you give them ample space to explore, they, over time, will feel the confidence to completing whatever task or assignment it is that they're needing to do. Sometimes kids feel like they need that constant guidance because they're scared of making a mistake, and by having mom right there, that makes them feel less scared. And so if you can find safe ways to kind of step aside to let your kid complete their work or make decisions on their own, that will help them over time, because no, they're not going to succeed every time. They may fail sometimes, but that will give them the confidence they need over time to begin making decisions for themselves. And it will help them feel resilient so that they will learn that even if I fail, it's okay. I can get back up and I can continue on. And when they do accomplish it, they will feel really proud of themselves. And it will help them learn over time that it's not just about the destination and getting the right answer. It's about the journey along the way. It's about being willing to be wrong. It's about willing to try even though you don't know. I actually have a poster in my room that basically says, it's okay to not know, but it's not okay to not try. That really we want our kids to constantly be willing to try, even if they don't totally know the whole journey from that first step. Because that's kind of what life is, right? Like, this is a life skill that they need to know, because not every time you're going to know exactly what happens when you walk out that door, or when you sign up for a class, or when you go to school, or you go to your first job. There may be lots of unknowns, but being willing to go out there and try anyway, and have the confidence that it's okay if things kind of go poorly. At the end of the day, I'll get to come home and it's going to be all right, gives them that ability to have confidence throughout those decisions. Strategy number 5, tie their schoolwork to real life. This can be really hard when you're covering subjects that maybe you as an adult have never had to use. So you may need to be creative, or you may need to use some hypotheticals or relate to someone else. So you might say, for example, what if you were to become A? Or you might need to say, hey, Aunt so-and-so or Uncle so-and-so, they do this and they've really needed to know this skill. They need to know, why is it helpful that I understand that I have reading comprehension? Why do I have to do these reading comprehension assignments? Or why do I have to learn math? Or when is writing ever going to be relevant in my daily life, right? So you have to really seek out ways that those things are relevant. And it can be really daunting to find ways to tie the schoolwork to real life, especially if you don't know where your child's interests may lead. So you might have to be, like I said, be creative, and you might have to use things in ways that you may not even realize that you're using them. So for example, I have a kiddo who really struggled with fractions, and he just didn't understand how I was ever going to need to know this in real life. And I related it to pizza, that when you order a pizza and you're with your friends, like, how do you want to make sure that everybody gets something fair? Well, you count up the pieces, right? And then you divide it by how many people there are. And that's basically fractions. It's the same way of thinking about, it's a different way of thinking about the same problem, right? That you're using the information even if you don't know it. When you go to the store and you see something 70% off, you're having to use your knowledge of percentage and multiplication in order to determine how much you're actually going to pay. Those are kind of more easy to understand concepts, but also like critically thinking or reading comprehension. You know, when you go for your driver's license, they're going to give you a whole book of rules of the road, and you're going to need to be able to read the book and recite back, if you have a verbal test like many states do, that you understand the material. So it's important for you to be able to have reading comprehension, even if it's something you're not interested in. That kind of thing. So just start thinking about throughout your day, throughout your life, when have you needed this skill, or where do you think that other people have needed this skill, to kind of point it out to them, because then that will help them retain the information and be able to draw the conclusion that, okay, this isn't all for naught. It's not a wasted endeavor. And that can help them more embrace the material. I think it's worth noting that, you know, the goal of educating, or what I think the goal of educating our kids, is to set them up to become whatever they want to do. That they can become whoever they want, they can do whatever they do, that they're not limited by the education that I've provided them, that I have provided them with a foundation in all the areas that they can then leap forward in whatever interests they have. And so I don't want to just cater to their one interest. I want to make sure that I try to make all of the subjects equally strong as much as I can, given their interest and their willingness, right? And part of that means that I'm having to embrace a lot of uncertainty. I don't know where their life is going to lead, but I do know that I want my child to feel like they can explore freely and fully engage with any subject that they want, and not feel like they're limited by that. There may come a time where they, obviously they're going to finish high school, and whether or not they go to college, they may choose a career that's really math-based. And if you don't give them the skills, they're going to feel limited by the education you provided. And so I really want to do the best I can by laying the most solid foundation, so that when they get to their next step, whatever it may be, they're not in any way inhibited by the education I provided them. So to kind of wrap up, the one piece of advice that I would offer for you to take away is to be patient. Helping your kids become empowered in their education is a journey. Helping them feel like they can direct their own learning doesn't look the same for every kid, and it evolves over time. So every time you might feel like you've got it right down, that you understand exactly what to do this school year, next year might throw you a curveball. So you really have to be patient with yourself and also with your kiddo, and embrace the unique journey that you and your kids are on. The goal of education is to inspire that lifelong love of learning, and to empower them throughout their life. If they can learn and have confidence that they can learn anything, then there's never a limit to what they can accomplish. So thanks for joining me on Continuing Education. We are excited to talk more about homeschooling. So if you have ideas of other things you'd like to hear, please visit our Podbean site and let us know.